The day I found the eviction notice taped to my apartment door, everything changed. It wasn't just the fear of being homeless, it was the realization that she knew. She knew I was struggling, that I was barely keeping my head above water after sending her almost $2,000 every month, and she did nothing. As I ripped the notice down, a single thought solidified in my mind: they would pay for this. If you have a sibling you would protect with your life, subscribe now. My life wasn't always like this, teetering on the edge of disaster. For years, I was the dependable one, the successful daughter who always answered the call. My mother, bless her heart, wasn't the best with finances. After my father left, she struggled, and I felt obligated to help. It started small, covering a utility bill here, a grocery run there. But then the mortgage payments became too much, and she confessed she was drowning. I couldn't bear the thought of her losing the family home, the place where I grew up, filled with memories, so I stepped in. My name is Delilah, and I made a decision that would define the next 2 years of my life. I secretly started paying her mortgage, $1,800 a month, plus any emergency that arose, a new water heater, car repairs, even a vacation once. To make it work, I moved into a tiny, cramped apartment, sacrificing my own comfort and dreams. I stopped going out with friends, cooked every meal at home, and worked overtime whenever I could. All the while, I listened to my mother's constant complaints about how hard she worked and how little she had, never once acknowledging my sacrifices. At family gatherings, she would brag about her independent lifestyle, conveniently forgetting the massive financial support I was providing. My brother, Mark, would sometimes look at me with a knowing glance, but he never said anything. He knew how Mom could be, and he probably didn't want to become a target. I told myself it was okay, that I was doing the right thing, that family comes first. But the resentment simmered beneath the surface, growing with each passing month. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner. The whole family was there: my mother, my brother and his wife, my aunt and uncle, and a few cousins. The aroma of turkey and stuffing filled the air, but the festive atmosphere couldn't mask the underlying tension. My mother, fueled by a couple of glasses of wine, launched into one of her favorite topics: my pathetic love life and my even more pathetic living situation. "Honestly, Delilah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you're 30 years old and still renting a shoebox? When are you going to get your act together? You'd think with all that education you'd be doing better." The room fell silent. I felt my face flush with humiliation as everyone stared at me. My brother shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but no one spoke up. I wanted to disappear, to crawl under the table and never come out. But something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the insult itself, it was the years of accumulated frustration, the constant belittling, the complete lack of appreciation. I had poured my heart and soul, not to mention my entire paycheck, into keeping her afloat, and this was how she repaid me? This was the thing. The day I found the eviction notice taped to my apartment door, everything changed. It wasn't just the fear of being homeless, it was the realization that she knew. She knew I was struggling, that I was barely keeping my head above water after sending her almost $2,000 every month, and she did nothing. As I ripped the notice down, a single thought solidified in my mind: they would pay for this. If you have a sibling you would protect with your life, subscribe now. My life wasn't always like this, teetering on the edge of disaster. For years, I was the dependable one, the successful daughter who always answered the call. My mother, bless her heart, wasn't the best with finances. After my father left, she struggled, and I felt obligated to help. It started small, covering a utility bill here, a grocery run there. But then the mortgage payments became too much, and she confessed she was drowning. I couldn't bear the thought of her losing the family home, the place where I grew up, filled with memories, so I stepped in. My name is Delilah, and I made a decision that would define the next 2 years of my life. I secretly started paying her mortgage, $1,800 a month, plus any emergency that arose, a new water heater, car repairs, even a vacation once. To make it work, I moved into a tiny, cramped apartment, sacrificing my own comfort and dreams. I stopped going out with friends, cooked every meal at home, and worked overtime whenever I could. All the while, I listened to my mother's constant complaints about how hard she worked and how little she had, never once acknowledging my sacrifices. At family gatherings, she would brag about her independent lifestyle, conveniently forgetting the massive financial support I was providing. My brother, Mark, would sometimes look at me with a knowing glance, but he never said anything. He knew how Mom could be, and he probably didn't want to become a target. I told myself it was okay, that I was doing the right thing, that family comes first. But the resentment simmered beneath the surface, growing with each passing month. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner. The whole family was there, my mother, my brother and his wife, my aunt and uncle, and a few cousins. The aroma of turkey and stuffing filled the air, but the festive atmosphere couldn't mask the underlying tension. My mother, fueled by a couple of glasses of wine, launched into one of her favorite topics, my pathetic love life and my even more pathetic living situation. Honestly, Delilah, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, you're 30 years old and still renting a shoebox? When are you going to get your act together? You'd think with all that education you'd be doing better. The room fell silent. I felt my face flush with humiliation as everyone stared at me. My brother shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but no one spoke up. I wanted to disappear, to crawl under the table and never come out. But something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the insult itself, it was the years of accumulated frustration, the constant belittling, the complete lack of appreciation. I had poured my heart and soul, not to mention my entire paycheck, into keeping her afloat, and this was how she repaid me? The eviction notice was a slap in the face, a cold, hard confirmation that my sacrifices meant absolutely nothing. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, the weight of my situation pressing down on me. Sleep was a distant dream, replaced by a relentless reel of memories, every missed opportunity, every sacrificed purchase, every condescending remark. The anger was a living thing inside me, coiling tighter with each passing hour. The next morning, I called my mother, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. Mom, I got an eviction notice, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know what to do. I need help. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat of silence that felt like an eternity. Then, she sighed. Delilah, honey, I'm sorry, but I just don't have the money right now, she said, her voice laced with a practiced tone of helplessness. Things are tight, you know how it is. Maybe you should try selling some of your things or getting a second job. Her words were like a punch to the gut. I had been pouring money into her life for 2 years, and she couldn't even spare a few $100s to help me avoid homelessness? The hypocrisy was staggering. But Mom, I choked out, I've been sending you almost $2,000 a month. Where is all that money going? Her voice turned sharp. That's none of your business, Delilah. I have my own expenses. You chose to give me that money, no one forced you. The call ended abruptly with her saying she was busy and needed to go. I was left alone with the deafening silence of my apartment, the eviction notice mocking me from the kitchen counter. I tried to reason with myself, to find a logical explanation for her behavior. Maybe she truly didn't realize how dire my situation was. Maybe she was just stressed and lashing out. But deep down, I knew the truth. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was prioritizing her own comfort and lifestyle, completely disregarding my well-being. Desperate, I turned to my brother, Mark. He had always been the more empathetic one, the one who seemed to understand me better. I explained the situation, my voice cracking with emotion as I recounted the conversation with my mother. To my surprise, he wasn't shocked. "I know, Delilah," he said quietly. "I've suspected for a while that she wasn't being completely honest about her finances." He told me that he had overheard her talking on the phone with her friends about shopping trips and spa days, things she claimed she couldn't afford. He admitted that he felt guilty for not saying anything sooner, but he didn't want to cause trouble. "I'm so sorry, Delilah," he said. "I wish I could help, but I'm barely making ends meet myself." His words offered a small measure of comfort, but they didn't solve my immediate problem. I was still facing eviction, still struggling to make ends meet. I spent the next few weeks frantically searching for a solution. I applied for countless jobs, but the competition was fierce, and I received rejection after rejection. I considered taking out a loan, but my credit score was in the toilet thanks to the constant financial strain. I even swallowed my pride and asked my friends for help, but they were all struggling with their own financial burdens. The walls were closing in. The stress was consuming me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't focus. I was a walking zombie, going through the motions of life, but feeling completely numb inside. The thought of losing my apartment, of being homeless, terrified me. It wasn't just about the physical discomfort, it was about the shame, the humiliation, the feeling of utter failure. I had worked so hard to build a stable life for myself, and now it was all crumbling before my eyes. The sleepless nights were filled with replays of my mother's callous words, fueling the burning ember of resentment within me. I started meticulously documenting everything: the bank statements showing the transfers to my mother, the text messages where she complained about her financial woes while simultaneously bragging about her new purchases, every detail that painted the picture of her deception. They thought I was broken, defeated. They thought I would simply disappear. The day I was officially evicted felt like the world was ending. Packing my belongings into boxes, each item a painful reminder of my shattered dreams, I felt a sense of despair I had never known before. My tiny apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison cell, its walls closing in on me. As I carried the last box to my beat-up car, I looked back at the empty space, a wave of nausea washing over me. 2 years of my life, 2 years of sacrifice, reduced to cardboard boxes and a trunk full of belongings. I had nowhere to go. My friends offered their couches, but I couldn't bring myself to impose. The shame was too overwhelming. So, I did the only thing I could think of: I drove. I drove aimlessly for hours, the highway stretching out before me like a bleak, unending path. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the landscape. I pulled into a deserted rest stop, the only sound the hum of the highway and the distant cry of a bird. I sat in my car, the engine turned off, the silence amplifying the turmoil in my mind. The weight of my failure pressed down on me, suffocating me. I had failed myself. I had failed my family. I had let my mother walk all over me. And for what? To be left with nothing, homeless and alone. I felt a tear trace a path down my cheek, followed by another, and another, until I was sobbing uncontrollably, the grief pouring out of me like a dam had broken. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of hopelessness. I considered just driving off, disappearing, leaving everything behind. The thought was tempting, a way to escape the pain, the shame, the crushing weight of reality. But then, something shifted. As I sat there in the darkness, surrounded by my meager possessions, a spark ignited within me. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment of self-discovery, but a quiet, stubborn refusal to be defeated. I realized that I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let my mother's greed and my brother's inaction destroy me. I had to fight back. I had to reclaim my life. The tears began to subside, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. The anger transformed, morphing from a destructive force into a powerful weapon. I would use their betrayal, their cruelty, as fuel. I would make them regret the day they ever underestimated me. The first step was survival. I couldn't plan my revenge from the streets. I needed a roof over my head, a stable income, a base of operations. I spent the next few days bouncing between friends' couches, showering at the gym, and eating cheap fast food. It was a humbling experience, but it hardened my resolve. I landed a temporary job as a waitress, the tips barely enough to cover my expenses, but it was a start. I found a cheap room in a rundown boarding house, sharing a bathroom with 3 other tenants, but it was a place to call my own. I spent my nights poring over my meticulously collected evidence, organizing bank statements, transcribing text messages, building my case. I felt like a detective, piecing together the puzzle of their deception. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became, but the more determined I was to expose them. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. I started small, focusing on gathering more information. I created fake social media profiles, using them to infiltrate my mother's online circles, monitoring her posts, and gleaning insights into her spending habits. I discovered that she had been flaunting her wealth online, posting pictures of expensive shopping sprees, luxurious vacations, and extravagant dinners. The hypocrisy was sickening. She was living a life of luxury, funded by my sacrifice, while I was struggling to survive. I also started digging into my brother's finances, discreetly probing for weaknesses. I learned that he had recently taken out a large loan to start a business, a risky venture that was already showing signs of struggling. He was vulnerable, desperate to maintain the facade of success. The pieces were starting to fall into place. I knew their weaknesses, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. I knew exactly how to take them down. I smiled, a cold, calculating smile that I barely recognized. The victim was gone. The planner had arrived. The world would soon learn that they messed with the wrong woman. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming my life. And I wouldn't rest until they had paid for what they had done. I knew I couldn't confront them directly, not yet. I needed irrefutable proof, a smoking gun that would expose their lies and shatter their carefully constructed facade. So, I started playing their game, acting the part of the struggling, downtrodden daughter and sister, all the while secretly gathering evidence. I visited my mother often, feigning helplessness and seeking her advice on my financial woes. Each visit was carefully orchestrated, designed to elicit incriminating statements and capture her callous disregard for my situation. I purchased a small, inconspicuous voice recorder, disguising it as a keychain, and made sure to have it with me during every conversation. I would steer the conversation towards my financial struggles, subtly reminding her of the money I had given her over the past 2 years, all the while carefully documenting her responses. She never suspected a thing, basking in her perceived superiority, oblivious to the trap I was setting. The recordings were damning, filled with her dismissive remarks, her blatant lies about her own finances, and her complete lack of empathy for my plight. It was sickening to hear her voice, dripping with condescension, knowing that she was the one responsible for my suffering. My brother, Mark, was a more difficult target. He wasn't malicious like my mother, but his inaction, his willingness to turn a blind eye to her deception, made him just as culpable. I knew I couldn't appeal to his sense of morality, He had already proven that he was willing to compromise his principles for the sake of avoiding conflict. Instead, I focused on his vulnerability, his failing business, his desperate need to maintain the appearance of success. I started subtly hinting that I knew about his financial struggles, dropping veiled references to his loan and his declining sales. I could see the fear in his eyes, the panic rising to the surface. He knew that if his business failed, his entire life would crumble. That was the leverage I needed. I began to casually offer my help, suggesting that I could introduce him to some potential investors I had met through my waitressing job, people who were always looking for promising business ventures. He was hesitant at first, wary of my motives, but the desperation in his eyes betrayed his true feelings. He was drowning, and I was offering him a lifeline that came with a very steep price. One evening, as I was helping my mother sort through some old photo albums, I stumbled upon a box of financial documents, hidden away in the back of a closet. My heart skipped a beat. It was a treasure trove of information, bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, all meticulously organized and documenting her extravagant spending habits. There were charges for designer clothes, lavish vacations, and expensive jewelry, all purchased while she was claiming to be struggling financially. It was the smoking gun I had been searching for. But there was also something else, something that made my blood run cold. A series of documents detailing a secret bank account, one that I had never known about, an account that contained a significant amount of money, far more than she could have possibly earned through her legitimate income. Where did this money come from? The question gnawed at me, consuming my thoughts. I knew I had to find out. I carefully photographed every document, making sure to capture every detail, every transaction, every hidden clue. I knew that this information could be the key to unraveling the entire web of deceit. To ensure the authenticity of my evidence and protect myself from potential legal repercussions, I consulted with a paralegal friend, Sarah. I explained the situation, omitting specific names to maintain confidentiality, and showed her the documents and recordings I had collected. She was appalled by my mother's behavior and impressed by my meticulous documentation. Sarah advised me on the best way to present the evidence, ensuring that it was admissible in court and would withstand scrutiny. She also warned me about the potential legal risks involved, advising me to proceed with caution and to seek legal counsel before taking any drastic action. I knew she was right. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The stakes were too high. I would need to be strategic, calculated, and above all, patient. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they turned surely. And I was determined to see justice served. As the days turned into weeks, my plan began to take shape, an intricate web of deception and manipulation, designed to expose their lies and bring them crashing down. I meticulously crafted my strategy, anticipating every possible scenario, every potential obstacle. I knew that I had to be prepared for anything. They wouldn't go down without a fight. But I was ready. I was armed with the truth, with the evidence, and with a burning desire for revenge. I smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a chill down my own spine. They had awakened a sleeping giant, and they were about to pay the price. The exact day they tried to end me. I would expose the truth. That secret bank account. It became my obsession. I spent weeks digging, using every resource I could find, tracing the transactions, analyzing the deposits, trying to uncover the source of the funds. It was like chasing a ghost, the trail leading me down blind alleys and dead ends. Just when I was about to give up, I found it, a small, almost insignificant detail buried in the fine print of one of the bank statements, a series of regular deposits from an offshore account, registered to a shell corporation. Shell corporations. Usually linked to money laundering and illegal activities. My heart pounded in my chest. This was bigger than I ever imagined. I dug deeper into the shell corporation, using my fake social media profiles to connect with people who might have information, discreetly probing for any leads. It was a risky move, but the potential reward was too great to ignore. Finally, after weeks of relentless searching, I found a connection, a former employee of the Shell Corporation, someone who was willing to talk, for a price. I met him in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, the air thick with smoke and suspicion. He was a nervous man, constantly looking over his shoulder, his eyes darting around the room. He told me that the Shell Corporation was a front for a criminal enterprise, involved in illegal activities. And my mother? She was their local contact, laundering their money through her secret bank account. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. My own mother, a criminal. It was almost too much to comprehend. But as the shock subsided, a cold, hard resolve settled within me. This changed everything. The trap was set. It was time to lure them in. I approached my brother, Mark, with a proposition. I told him that I had found an investor who was interested in his business, a wealthy businessman who was looking for promising ventures to invest in. I painted a picture of wealth and success, dangling the prospect of financial salvation before his eyes. He was hesitant at first, still suspicious of my motives, but the allure of money was too strong to resist. He agreed to meet with the investor, unaware that he was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. I arranged the meeting at a fancy restaurant downtown, a place where my mother frequented, a place where she would be sure to see us. I knew that she wouldn't be able to resist eavesdropping, her curiosity piqued by the prospect of my brother's newfound wealth. As Mark and I sat at the table, discussing his business plans, I made sure to drop subtle hints about the investor's background, mentioning his connections to offshore accounts and shell corporations. I watched as my mother's eyes widened, her face betraying her shock and recognition. She knew exactly. After the meeting, my mother confronted me, her voice trembling with anger and fear. She accused me of trying to sabotage her, of trying to expose her secrets. I feigned innocence, playing the part of the concerned daughter, pretending to be oblivious to her criminal activities. I told her that I was simply trying to help my brother, that I had no idea about the investor's shady connections. She didn't believe me, of course, but she couldn't prove anything. I had covered my tracks too well. The next day, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I answered it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the investor, his voice cold and menacing. He told me that he knew what I was up to, that he knew that I was trying to expose his operation. He warned me to back off, to stop interfering, or there would be consequences. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, my mind racing. They knew. They knew that I was a threat. And they weren't going to let me get away with it. I had underestimated them. I had thought that I could outsmart them, that I could expose their crimes without putting myself in danger. But I was wrong. They were ruthless, powerful, and they were willing to do anything to protect their secrets. I knew that I was in over my head. But I couldn't back down now. I had come too far. I had sacrificed too much. I was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside my window, sounded like a threat. I knew that they were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I had to be careful. I had to be smarter. I had to be one step ahead of them. I decided to take the offensive. I knew that I couldn't beat them at their own game, that I couldn't match their resources or their power. But I had something that they didn't, the truth. And I was determined to use it. The next morning, I sent an anonymous email to the authorities, detailing my mother's involvement in the money laundering operation, providing them with all the evidence I had collected. I knew that it was a risky move, that it could expose me to danger, but it was the only way to bring them down. Then, I waited. The waiting was the hardest part, the silence amplifying the fear and uncertainty. Every phone call, every knock at the door, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I knew that it was only a matter of time before they came for me. But I was ready. I had prepared for this moment. I had a plan. The final piece of my plan involved a public forum. A local community meeting where I knew both my mother and brother would be present. It was a charity gala, ironically, focused on helping families in financial crisis. The perfect stage for my revelation. I secured a spot on the agenda under the guise of sharing a personal story about overcoming adversity. They had no idea what was coming. As I stood backstage, waiting for my turn, my heart pounded in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. The culmination of months of planning, plotting, and sacrificing. I could hear the murmur of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, the polite laughter. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I walked onto the stage, the spotlight blinding me, the sea of faces blurring together. I saw my mother and brother in the front row, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. I smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver down my own spine. I began to speak, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each word. I told my story, my voice laden with emotion, recounting the hardships I had faced, the betrayals I had suffered, the sacrifices I had made. And then, I dropped the bomb. I revealed my mother's secret bank account, her involvement in the money laundering operation, her betrayal of my trust. I presented the evidence, the bank statements, the recordings, the photographs, exposing her crimes for all to see. The room erupted in chaos. Gasps of shock, whispers of disbelief, shouts of anger. My mother's face turned ashen, her eyes wide with terror. My brother stared at me in disbelief, his mouth agape. The world was about to learn the truth. The chaos was immediate. People were yelling, pointing, and recording with their phones. My mother sat frozen, a statue carved from shame and disbelief. The carefully constructed mask of respectability she had worn for so long shattered, revealing the ugly truth beneath. My brother, Mark, looked like he'd been struck. His face was pale, his eyes darting between me and my mother, trying to process the enormity of the situation. He knew his business was likely finished. The investor, a man who was indeed connected to the criminal enterprise my mother was involved with, made a swift exit, melting into the crowd like a shadow. I continued, my voice now amplified by the microphone, ensuring every word resonated. I detailed the threats I had received, the fear I had lived with, and my determination to expose their wrongdoing, no matter the cost. I presented the evidence I had gathered, meticulously laying out the timeline of their deception, the flow of the money, and the identities of those involved. The authorities who had been alerted by my anonymous tip arrived, securing the scene and taking my mother into custody. As they led her away, her eyes met mine. There was no anger, no hatred, only a profound sense of defeat. In that moment, I saw the woman she could have been, the mother I had longed for, buried beneath layers of greed and deceit. Mark tried to approach me, his face etched with desperation. He begged me to stop, to consider the consequences of my actions, to think about the family. What about us? He pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. Everything is ruined. I looked at him, my heart heavy with sadness. He had chosen to remain silent, to protect his own interests, to turn a blind eye to his mother's crimes. He had made his choice. You made your bed, Mark, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. Now lie in it. His shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with tears. He knew that there was nothing he could say, nothing he could do to change the situation. He was a casualty of his own choices, a victim of his own complicity. The room began to clear as the police took statements and gathered evidence. I stood on the stage, alone, the silence amplifying the weight of what I had done. It was over. The truth was out. The game was finished. The fallout was swift and brutal. My mother's arrest made headlines, exposing the criminal enterprise she was involved with. The Shell Corporation was raided, its assets seized, and its members arrested. My brother's business collapsed, his reputation ruined, his financial empire reduced to ashes. He lost everything, his house, his car, his social standing. He became a pariah, shunned by his friends and colleagues. The weight of his choices had crushed him. I watched from a distance as their lives unraveled, their carefully constructed worlds crumbling around them. I saw the pain, the suffering, the despair. And I felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, only a profound sense of emptiness. The revenge I had craved had come at a cost that I was willing to pay, but a cost nonetheless. I had lost my family, my sense of belonging, my innocence. But I had gained something else, my freedom. I was no longer a victim, no longer bound by their lies and their deceit. I was free to live my own life, to make my own choices, to forge my own destiny. They tried to end me. But instead, I ended their lies. The news cycle eventually moved on, as it always does. My mother faced the consequences of her actions, and my brother was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. I moved away, seeking a fresh start, a new beginning. I never spoke to them again. The wounds were too deep, the scars too raw. Time passed, and the memories faded, replaced by new experiences, new relationships, new challenges. I built a new life for myself, a life filled with purpose and meaning. I found peace in helping others, in advocating for justice, in standing up for what is right. I learned that forgiveness is not always possible, but healing is. I learned that the past does not define us, but it shapes us. I learned that we are stronger than we think, more resilient than we believe, more capable than we imagine. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.